New documents show that President Biden was checked out of decisions on pardoning felons and commuting the sentences of death row inmates, while his aides worked to make him look involved in the process. I'm Susan Paricchio, senior politics reporter for The Washington Times, and this is my Q&A on former President Biden's Autopen pardons. These records were leaked to media outlets amid the Trump administration's investigation into Mr. Biden's historically heavy use of the Autopen. He signed more pardons than any president in history, and most of them were signed by a mechanical signature known as the Autopen. The National Archives and Records Administrations handed over the Biden administration memos to the Trump administration, and they are now examining what was going on behind the scenes as Biden prepared to leave office. Well, first of all, they show that staff were behind the scenes making sure they were creating a paper trail of involvement for the former president. There were internal leaked statements from staff claiming that his best hours for work were to begin at 10 a.m. and end work at 4 p.m. A lot of these emails were going back and forth amongst staff late into the night, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, where they discussed how to make it look as though Biden had signed off on these pardons and to make sure that it does appear as though he was involved in the process. And that was how they characterized the pardons in the end, that Biden had signed off on them verbally, but then the Autopen was used to physically sign 3 warrants, and each of the warrants had hundreds of pardons among them. Amongst Republicans on Capitol Hill, they believe this is more evidence that Biden was not involved in these pardons, in that they were in fact carried out by top members of his staff. Some of the people who were pardoned are not just drug dealers and people with sentencing disparities. These are people who have violent criminal histories. They were convicted not only of drug offenses, but of some of violent offenses such as assault and murder. And they have been pardoned and are being released, or many have already been released. And they seem to go beyond what President Biden talked about at the time in terms of who he wished to pardon, and that they would only be nonviolent drug offenders. You also have people commenting from the Oversight Project. This is a government watchdog group that analyzed all of these Autopen signatures to determine how often the mechanical pen was used to sign documents. I think the questions being raised by the Oversight Project involve whether or not these really went beyond the intent of what President Biden wanted when he talked about pardons at the end of his term. Now, the former president gave an interview to the New York Times earlier this summer. He said that he was involved and that while he did not sign off on each pardon, he gave the parameters to his staff on who he wanted to be pardoned and that those individuals fit within those parameters. He's denying it, saying that he approved all of these, generally speaking, all these pardons. That is really the outstanding question here. So far, it hasn't affected them at all. They've received the pardons. The pardons have gone through. These individuals have walked free from prison or had their sentences reduced, and those reduced sentences stand. The president also pardoned members of Congress preemptively who hadn't been charged with any crime, but who he feared President Trump may try to go after. Those include Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was the COVID advisor, Democrats, and a couple of Republicans who served in the House on a special committee that examined the January 6th riots at the Capitol, and his own family. He pardoned his brother, sister-in-law, other members of the family. His own son, Hunter Biden, was the one pardon that the president physically signed. Her son was facing a conviction on tax fraud, as well as he had already been convicted on gun charges. So that pardon also still stands. And one interesting thing about the Biden Autopen pardons are his aides were discussing behind the scenes allowing Vice President Harris to have the ability to greenlight these pardons. There's an email where they talk about having her have the final say. And that's definitely unusual, and it's certainly not what the understanding is about who has the pardon power. I don't believe the vice president has the pardon power, only the president does. So that's interesting that her name comes up as someone who can have a say in the pardoning process. And so we wait to see what happens next. President Trump has his Justice Department investigating the Autopen and investigating these pardons. And the president himself has called them worthless and void, etc. But no real physical steps have been taken to stop the pardons. And until that happens, so far, it's just really about investigating and making the public aware of what may have been going on behind the scenes as Biden prepared to leave office and amid questions about his age and his own cognitive abilities during his first term. For the Washington Times, I'm Susan Ferricchio. For more coverage, visit WashingtonTimes.com.